Our next talk is going to be on agroforestry's environmental services, drawing the big picture. The speakers are Drs. Ranjit Udawata and Steve Anderson, two colleagues that are well known to all of us. Drs. Udawata and Anderson are faculty colleagues with the center, or actually with the Soil, Environmental, and Atmospheric Sciences Department here at the University of Missouri. Looks like Dr. Udawata will speak first, followed by Dr. Anderson.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about agroforestry's environmental services and how it can be expanded to a larger scale areas. Steve, I will talk about those benefits, and Steve will talk about the scaling effect. And we will take questions at the end of the second talk. And unfortunately, Peter is not here today. If you have any tough questions, send to Peter, motawalip@missouri.edu. Okay. These are 5 main agroforestry practices: riparian buffers, that is planting grass, trees, shrubs, or perennial species along streams, lakes, water bodies, and wetlands. And the next one is alley cropping. Alley cropping is planting agricultural crops between tree rows. Third one is silvopasture, raising pasture, cattle grazing under forestry. Fourth is forest farming. Valuable crops, medicinal crops are grown for economic benefits in the forestry. Fifth is windbreaks. Windbreaks are for protection of crops, animals, and for structures. We practice agriculture today basically for economic benefits and production efficiencies, and also creating some problems that we didn't have so many years ago. As of now, agriculture uses about 2/3 of world water, and it's the main source of water pollution according to 2009 US EPA report. And agriculture, forestry, and fisheries lead to loss of biodiversity. Agriculture has negatively impacted in terms of land degradation, salinization, over-extraction of water, and reducing genetic resources. We are facing severe questions as of now due to some agricultural practices. And these can be impossible to reverse or difficult to quantify. And when we created, we didn't have that much thinking, and now we need a lot of thinking in order to solve these problems. Agroforestry could be one of the solutions to overcome these problems. It's an intensive land management practice, intentionally integrating trees into crop areas or in animal husbandry. It has the main idea is to use biological, biophysical benefits, and all landowners from every end is benefited socially, economically, and environmentally due to agroforestry practices. It's not new. It has been practiced over thousands of years in other parts of the world. As you see on this picture, you can see pumpkin, chili plants, papaya, and coconut, and the house also behind the trees. So as you see on the second diagram, above ground and below ground space is efficiently used for resources and light for all the crops. So as you imagine, there will be very little nutrient losses either by leaching, surface flow, subsurface flow, or the overland flow. It's an all solution for new problems. However, scientific studies initiated during the last 20 or 30 years showing all the beneficial effects of agroforestry. These can be mainly grouped into 3 categories: ecosystem services, environmental services, and economic benefits. Those occur at temporal and spatial scales. Some of them are initially, some of the benefits occur at a later stage in the management system. The studies are conducted at different scales. Some are small samples or plots, experimental units, small watersheds, farms, and then expanded to large watershed areas. Some may occur at millimeter, micrometer scale, and they can be extrapolated to a larger scale. I will talk about a little bit about this aspect, and Steve will further explain about the scaling effect. In United Nations 2004 Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, a 4-year study involving over 1,000 scientists all over the world have grouped ecosystem services into 4 major categories: provisioning, regulating, supporting, and cultural. Cultural means spiritual and recreational. Supporting is such as nutrient cycling, crop pollination. Regulating means global climate change and diseases. Provisioning is production of food and water. As you know, and during the next 2 days you will hear all the benefits of agroforestry. Agroforestry improves air quality, water quality, soil quality. It helps mitigation of global warming gases and sequestration of carbon dioxide, helps improve biodiversity, reduces pest and disease infestation, and improve aesthetic value of the land. I will use some of our data generated by the MU Research Center to explain these benefits, mainly using 2 of our watershed studies at the Greenlee and Hark. Air quality. Air quality is a serious concern. It's indoor, outdoor, as well as urban and rural areas. Some of the agricultural practices also impacting air quality. The US EPA has real-time data available to measure air quality. As we all know, when you bring a Christmas tree to house, it gives a good smell. The same principle can be used to eliminate bad odors. If you plant several rows of trees, it will help reduce the bad effects of air quality coming out of maybe concentrated animal operations, and using windbreaks. Windbreaks are more common, and we know windbreaks help reduce water losses, protect crop, livestock, as well as structures. But there aren't many studies examining odor abatement effect using the windbreak. Dr. Chung Ho Ling and group at the Center for Agroforestry initiated a study in Knox County, Missouri, that is northeast Missouri, examining how to use tree buffers to reduce odor effects. The idea is to come up with a plan, how many species, how many rows, and buffer configurations. They have 3 rows of trees. Inner row is pitch loblolly, and the middle row is red maple and pin oak alternately, because pin oak holds leaves until the end of December, and the outer row is allegheny. The air samples were collected before the study and during the study, and they are examining ammonia distribution, hydrogen sulfide, and 30-some volatile organic compounds and particulate organic matter. How the trees are filtering these compounds coming out of concentrated feeding operations. So this is the exit point from the animal feeding operation, collecting air samples to examine ammonia distribution and hydrogen sulfide distribution. And the soil quality. Soil quality means perform a certain function, sustaining to biological productivity, maintain environmental quality, promote plants, animal, and human health. This was defined by Doran and Parkin in 1994. The equation shows soil quality is a function of water holding capacity, structural configuration, root depth, CEC, nutrient supply, and biodiversity. This kind of diagram or equation relationship can be used to generate a relationship for all the horizons. The idea is so this is showing the effect of bulk density, how bulk density changes can be ranked for root growth, or pH, how to rank pH for a certain horizon for a root growth or certain function. Then these can be integrated to come up with a number for a horizon, and they can be vertically integrated to generate a value for the profile. So this allows to examination of soil quality improvement due to incorporation of agroforestry practices. Now I will show some of the data generated by us at different watersheds. This data is from Novelty. Incorporation of agroforestry buffers have shown increasing glucosaminidase, dehydrogenase, and FDA activity in grass, agroforestry, and grass waterways as compared to crop areas. Crop areas always had significantly lower dehydrogenase, FDA, and glucosaminidase activities. What does this mean? Mineralization rate, nitrogen availability, carbon sequestration, different exudates by these microorganisms and microbial populations. And further, Nancy Mungai's study using a mature agroforestry practice has shown in the tree rows with pecan had more microbial carbon and microbial nitrogen as compared to the middle areas. So this shows as agroforestry matures, these enzymatic activities as well as microbial carbon and nitrogen accumulation increases in the management systems. Not only my biological features, it also helps to increase carbon and nitrogen in the soil profile. As you see here, crop areas had significantly lower carbon and nitrogen as compared to grass, agroforestry, or grass waterways. And due to incorporation of trees, they develop structural roots, and it helps to store recalcitrant form of carbon in the soil profile. Not only biological properties, it also improves water stable aggregates. If you look at this figure, it shows crop areas had significantly lower water stable aggregates as compared to grass buffers, agroforestry, or grass waterways. So that means more aeration, more air, water, heat movement, and more sites for microbial communities. And when you look at these changes in a normal body X-ray CT scanner, this is how it will look. Row crop area scanner, grass buffer scanner, and agroforestry scanner. If you separate pore areas in the matrix, that means the soil, crop areas had very little number of pores and porosity as compared to agroforestry areas. Much more pore areas or porosity in the agroforestry areas as compared to crop areas. And they also improve other soil hydraulic properties. For example, buffer areas had lower bulk density up to about 30 centimeter depth compared to the crop areas. And hydraulic conductivity is much higher in buffer areas compared to the crop areas. This study was conducted at the Greenlee Center, and measured porosity was much higher in buffer areas compared to the crop areas. And due to these improvements in the soil physical properties, buffer areas can hold more water due to the improvement of soil structure, porosity. This shows soil water holding capacity in 2007 from October 9 to November 21st during the recharge period during 10 rain events, 5, 10, 20, and 40 centimeter depths using Campbell soil water sensors. For the first 3 depths, tree and buffer areas had higher water content compared to crop areas. However, at the 40 centimeter depth, there was no difference because this is the clay pan region and the roots may have had infiltrated into this area, 40 centimeter depth in the crop area. And now we know our results show that incorporation of agroforestry improves soil quality and air quality. This is about the water quality part of the agroforestry, how agroforestry helps to improve water quality. This most recent US EPA report shows 44% of the river length is impacted by some kind of pollution, lakes 64%, and estuaries about 30%. This could be due to improper practices, either crop or agriculture with animals, or stream bank degradation. And if the nutrients or the pollutions are not taken up by any other means, they might end up in the Gulf of Mexico. And other studies have shown incorporation of shrubs, grasses, forbs, and bioengineering techniques can help reduce water quality degradation and stabilize stream banks and also save the cropland. This was designed by Schultz Group in Iowa. It includes perennial grass species and shrubs, slow-growing trees, fast-growing trees, and stream bank engineering, as shown here. And this has a fence, so animal cannot get into the stream area. And in order to examine these effects and to expand to the next level, we initiated 2 different studies. One is in the northeast Missouri in the clay pan region for the row crop management. Another one is at Hark with the deep loess soils for animal management. This study consists of 3 watersheds: grass buffer watershed, tree grass buffer watershed, and a control watershed. This is a picture of tree grass buffer in 2007 and the grass buffer. This is a picture of animal management watershed with tree buffers. All these watersheds are equipped with flumes, water samplers, and flow measuring devices. We looked at 2 different kinds of water, surface runoff and subsurface flow. This is the results of surface runoff. During runoff events, agroforestry and grass buffer watersheds have reduced total runoff volume as compared to the control watersheds without any buffers. And also, agroforestry and grass buffer watersheds reduce sediment loss as compared to the control watershed. And we looked at nitrogen. Nitrogen concentrations were also lower in the control buffer watersheds as compared to the control. And then this right side shows the results from the grass management for 5 years. In 2004 and 2008, we had significant rainfall, and control watersheds had much more higher runoff volumes as compared to the buffer watershed, 2 buffer managements with tree grass and grass management. And sediment loss was significantly lower as compared to the control watershed without no buffers. Similarly, nitrate loss was also lower in the buffer watersheds. The previous slide showed surface runoff losses associated with buffers. And this one shows subsurface nutrient concentrations soon after rainfall events, nitrate concentration and dissolved phosphorus concentration. Samples were collected using PVC tubes with ceramic cups, samples collected after each rainfall event and analyzed for concentrations. This diagram shows concentration at 5, 10 centimeter depth, 20 and 40 centimeter depth. Basically, buffer areas didn't have very low nitrate concentration and phosphorus concentration. Crop areas had higher concentrations and even up to 80 milligrams per liter. It could be due to soon after fertilizer application. And if you look at the average concentration, crop areas had higher nitrate concentration during the 2 years compared to grass or agroforestry areas. And dissolved phosphorus also behaved the same way. For the exam in 2 years, 2007 and 8, crop areas had much higher concentration compared to grass or agroforestry areas. Now we have all kinds of data: surface, subsurface, management, topography, precipitation, soil, all the data. The idea is to expand, look at the long-term benefits of incorporation of agroforestry buffers. APEX is a field scale model that can be used to examine management effect, fertilizer application, buffer effects, and that's the idea of the next step. Then when the APEX was run, this is a part of Sandeep Kumar's PhD dissertation. He looked at the effect of buffers at Hark watersheds. 2 watersheds with no buffers, 2 watersheds with agroforestry buffers. Blue is the measured value, red is the simulated value. Model very well correlated with the measured and simulated data for 4 years. Now the next step would be to take these numbers to a larger scale. According to Gassman's report on 2009, APEX data can be fed to SWOT model because APEX is a small scale watershed model that can be used to understand management effect, manure application, buffers, harvesting. SWOT is for a larger watershed model. It can be used even to compare farm economic models. This is the concept that we might use: 2 watersheds and going into 14 or 12 digit hydrological units and to examine what is the larger scale effect of buffer management on watershed management. Then the 4th item I was going to talk about is the carbon sequestration due to incorporation of agroforestry buffers. Carbon dioxide is a major greenhouse gas, and the concentration now is about 385 parts per million. It's about 38% increase from the pre-industrial level. According to Liqueur, About 43% of the carbon dioxide released between 59 and 2008 is remained in the atmosphere. So there is the trees can be used to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. If you look at the root system, this is Kenny Bader. When we examine the root biomass, root angles, you see roots in this area. Agroforestry is recognized as one of the practices under reforestation and afforestation to mitigate greenhouse gases under Kyoto Protocol. Agroforestry practices can sequester 0.29 megagrams carbon per hectare per year in West Africa to 15 megagrams carbon per year in the Puerto Rico region. They have presented about 20 different sites. I selected the lowest and the highest from this report that was published in 2009. When Montganani and Nea looked at the carbon sequestration potential of different zones, temperate agroforestry has the capacity to sequester about 63 megagrams per carbon per hectare per year. And other studies show agroforestry has a greater potential than other management systems. This shows agroforestry can sequester more carbon than the pasture management. And in our Greenly watershed study, we have found 4% increase of carbon in the grass buffer and tree buffer areas within 4 years after establishment of buffers. So this is the main reason. If you look at the root distribution depth and the structure and the carbon forms, this tree had 14-inch diameter root at 10 feet depth from the ground level. So incorporation of trees have sent carbon at a more deeper depth, and volume is much larger, and carbon forms root exudates by the tree, and root turnover is about 33% of the NPP is used for root production, and associated microbial communities. They also exudate carbon and help store carbon at a deeper layer in the soil profile. So agroforestry really helps improve air quality, water quality, soil quality, and mitigation of greenhouse gases and carbon sequestration. And Steve will talk about scaling effect and how it can be used to expand agroforestry benefits on the larger scale. You can ask questions at the end of Steve's talk.
Well, good morning. We're doing a little tag team here. Ranjith asked me to help contribute some ideas on upscaling some of the properties and things we're doing. Just give a little background. My experience, though, has probably been more on the core scale, maybe up to the profile, and then also we've gone to a lot of smaller scales in the tomography area. So I'm going to be I'm a little weaker, so I want to start with something I'm familiar with, and then we're going to speculate on where we're probably headed into expanding this and upscaling this to larger watershed scale kind of simulations. I'd like to credit a good friend here, Claire Buffo, is with us. She's the one that's probably about 8 years ago helped. I've done work with hydrologic modeling before, but nothing at the larger scale, and so Claire's the one that's kind of helped with students, graduate students, help us in this area. Just a little bit of outline here of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about a similar media example. Some of the graduate students here that have had class may remember this. Talk about the concepts of upscaling, and then the big challenge we have is that physical laws that we're using across these different scales are actually different, and we'll talk about some of the challenges associated with them and some of the compromises we make with models. And then finally one, which is where we're headed with the agroforestry buffers and expanding those and how the impact they have across larger watersheds that Ranjith sort of indicated. We're going to talk about these linked models for different scales. I'm borrowing this from Henry Lin, who's at Penn State University. He's really emphasized over the last 5 or 6 years or more the concept of hydropedology. Pedology is kind of the area of soil science and some of the pores, and very important in terms of the water transport in these systems. But he's also tried to link the concept that we have hydro with this as well. Now, we always are working with this, the mesoscopic scale, or what we call the critical zone, often the profile, the pedons. These are where all the processes and things, and we have a lot of effort over many decades evaluating various properties, soil chemical, biological, and physical properties. Of course, to understand this, we often go down to a much smaller scale, even smaller than this sometimes, the basic structure of the soils and how water and transport in these pores is happening. Because this is very, very important. The different kind of soils we have will impact the hydrology and the processes that are occurring in the watershed scale. But of course, what we're all interested in, of course, is this macroscopic area and how do buffers, the environmental effects of these practices, how do they impact water resources at a much larger scale. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk about this little example. These two individuals, Ed Miller and Bob Miller, grew up here in Columbia. Their father, M.F. Miller, was the dean of the College of Ag many years ago. But they came up with a really interesting concept that's still referred to when we start talking about scaling issues. This is a very, very important concept. And so Ed Miller was at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Bob ended up at Cornell University. But many, many decades ago, they came up with this concept of how do we scale processes. And so they came up with this idea, just the theory of this, and then many decades later, it's being practiced more. And the idea was the characteristic length scale. And so the idea is in a soil, you could have a characteristic length 1 in one soil horizon, and maybe a different one in another soil horizon, and at different landscape positions. So this is a kind of revolutionary concept for its time. We didn't have the data sets, we didn't have the computers that came about many decades later, but this was a really unique concept. And still this paper is referred to in a recent publication on scaling in soil science. So Ed and Bob, Bob I think is still alive. I talked to him a few years ago. Ed has since passed away, but Ed worked with the physics department at Wisconsin and soil science, and Bob at the agronomy and crops program and soils program at Cornell University. So several decades later, our work at Arizona actually took these data and showed this, because it's very, very important when we start doing modeling of handling these porous properties. And so this is the scale more I'm familiar with and done more work with. So he took water characteristic curves from a field, fairly large field, and typically when we have water retention, this is the tension, how much water is held at various energies, and then looking at water content, here it's just scaled to a degree of saturation. You don't really see a lot of pattern. It slightly wets up as we get to lower tensions and dries down as we get to higher tensions. But all he did was he took this characteristic length scale, one value for each horizon, each landscape position, and after the scaling, he was able to coalesce these onto what we typically see for a water retention curve. And our work was, again, took the Miller and Miller idea and did this. This is very unique because it's very efficient. All you have to have is that characteristic length for each of the soil horizons, each of the landscape positions. You don't have to have all the numbers, and you can do the watershed simulations. So it's kind of a neat concept. Again, it's difficult when we get to scaling up to bigger watersheds, but at least it's a nice idea and kind of a principle that's been used. So this idea has been used over the last, probably since the late 1970s. Okay, now we have, and again, Miller and Miller didn't have the idea of fractals, which is the scaling concepts that are being used. They didn't have that idea, but again, that's what they were in essence doing, and they've shown now relationships of this power law and using the Sierpinski carpet to represent the porous media of that system. And Ranjit didn't mention, but we've done some work on some of the tomography issues, trying to scale across different levels, at least at the pore scale. I think borrowing from Henry Lynn's idea, let's now talk a little bit about scaling, okay? And this is kind of taking it at least from a soil science kind of perspective, but it's very important when we start looking at these processes in the watersheds. A lot of times we like to work with this PEDON idea, sort of the critical zone. We'll use a little symbol for the model scale I. We want to go up to the landscape, you know, I+1, I+2, again, field, apex modeling, maybe landscape, SWOT kind of modeling. This is what we're trying to do. Can we incorporate enough of the processes accurately in these models from the pore scale up to that scale to be able to simulate the way water behaves in watersheds? Of course, we have to always remember that often we're also going down to the I-1 or I-2 down the PED to even lower sometimes. Keith Goyen likes to get down to really low levels. But trying to understand the processes that are going on that we want to upscale. Because this is the challenge, upscaling. Can we basically take these across many different orders of magnitude? Another concept I mentioned, we have problems with physical laws. We can't use the same law always for all these different scales. This is Jan Hendricks and Fleury kind of came up with this. Again, these ideas have been around. We start going from a pore scale up to a landscape scale. Interestingly, we often shift the different models we use. Okay, so conceptually, it's difficult to do this. So here's the fluid continuum. We use the Hagen-Poiseuille relationship at the profile. We use a representative elementary volume concept, and we use the Henry-Darcy equation. Many of you probably have heard of this. And then with the unsaturated conditions, we lump in the Buckingham. So interesting, even going from a column, from a pore to a column, sometimes we don't always use the same physical laws because, again, there's so many challenges. So difficult to have all the pores characterized at a certain resolution and you scale this up to a watershed setting. It's just impossible. So again, this is the compromises that are done. So the one we're going to be talking about and mostly using is the landscape model, where we get into mass balances and mass conservation. So the physical laws, we kind of help use those, but often we're going to be simplifying those as we move to those larger scale. So just showing the different relationships. The Hagen-Poiseuille, it's basically based on the radius of pores. So you characterize the pore diameter. The profile, we want the hydraulic conductivity functions. Okay, the saturated conductivity that Ranjith was mentioned, we measure in a lot of sites. And then also the gradients. Of course, the landscape, we're just lumping these in kind of a rough balance. We use precipitation, inputs, runoff, ET, and drainage, and the change in the water content in the profile. So surprisingly, we jump these different scales, we're often using different models, and that's basically just the reasons for it. We can't do everything once we get up to the landscape kind of scale. I'm going to show just basically most of the work we've done is probably from the plot down to the pore scale. We've done a little bit on some small watersheds. We're hoping to work more with the watershed scale. When we do pores, we're typically using X-ray computed tomography or microcomputed tomography. Ranjith showed a few slides of those. We're often relating the pores that we described there up to the column, and then hopefully scanning that up to the field profile as well. Now, once we go to the plots and the small watersheds and up the watershed, we're then shifting to those other models, those scales with basically the water balance. And we're able to look at things like sediment reduction, nutrient herbicide reductions in terms of runoff, hopefully benefiting from the agroforestry buffers or grass buffers that we use. Just going to show you a few slides. Again, most of this here, I'm not going to give you a lot of data. I don't have a lot of time. Ranjith, want me just to share a few concepts with you here. This was just showing you when we go to the synchrotron, this is, medical hospitals, we can do tomography, but they're not the high resolution. We either go to the synchrotron, the national labs, or some other type of scanners. We can actually get down and characterize the pores, at least to a certain resolution. These are being characterized in this particular diagram at about a 100 micrometer scale and larger. This is a 3-inch core. Okay, we brought in, we scanned it very intensively, and then volume rendered it. And so what we're seeing here is basically the pores. Okay, this is like a wormhole in here that we can actually characterize, and then if we wanted to simulate water flow through this, we could use the Hagen-Poiseuille relationship and do that in a very nice way. This was advertised, this particular slide here we did for advertising for the World Congress of Soil Science. It was held a couple of years ago. Now with the columns, we can measure saturated conductivity, very important property. In essence, that is the property that kind of scales. It's very, very important across these different units. The constant head permeameter, and then here we have the macroporosity scaled with scanners, the tomography, and we can relate that to the bulk core property. So that's, again, a very useful exercise that we've been able to do in the past. When we get to the profile, typically we're looking at monitoring infiltration, things like this. Again, it's still kind of a vertical system. We're not going up to the watershed scale or the plot scale, but again, we have related properties measured here at the profile level, also down to the core level, and then related those back to the tomography. So we can scale across those, at least in predictive ways with regression relationships, et cetera. Okay, now let's talk about the plots. This is where we're starting to expand up to the watershed level. It's really nice with a plot. These are the plots that were established out at Bradford by Humberto Blanco. Vinicius' PhD now is over at Kansas State. And Dr. Henry Lin and Bob Lurch are using these to look at transport of herbicides across these plots. Here we can Again, it's very nice. These plots are small enough we can use a rainfall simulation, control the weather input, and then look at here in the case of a stiff stem grass, the benefit of that buffer on reducing, the sediments, reducing the amount of nutrients or herbicides coming off from these different plots. This is very nice. We can control this. We make sure that I know Chung Ho's talked about it, you make sure those buffers are well established. Again, some changes have happened, but you always make sure they're working well behaved. We get up to the field, everybody's not managing those quite as well as we can do here on these plots. But again, we can use this information to hopefully scale this information to a larger unit. I'm now going to borrow some work that Ashish Mugdal and Claire Buffo is involved with us, where we're trying to now scale across a couple of units. This is at least the experience, most recent experience we have. Hopefully in a few months this will be done and we can be able to talk about this much better. This is supported by the Conservation Effects Assessment Project, the SEEP program, collaboration with the John Sadler's unit. But it's very, very important to look at these scales. So let's talk about this briefly. This is up at Centralia. Some of you have been up to this watershed. These are basically plots that are about 0.35 hectares in size. Again, fairly large compared to the one we just saw. And these were rain-fed, but Ashish was able to do, again, taking hydraulic properties that we monitored with columns and be able to expand that in terms to be able to get runoff and atrazine correlations well with the measured ones. So we take the apex model and calibrate and validate it and be able to use that for predictions with these plots. Okay, so that's a 0.35 hectare scale. Now we have field 1, we call this field 1 here. It's right adjacent to it. This is about a 35 hectare scale. Okay, so about 2 orders of magnitude increased. And what Ashish is getting, again, I think most of this work is pretty much finished now. Claire can comment about it. But anyway, we've divided this up to about 35 sub-basin units and be able to superimpose conservation measures in each of those units with a calibrated and validated model using data collected this year and using information we've gained from this information on these plots to how it behaves on that particular scale. Okay? Now, the next few months, we'll be scaling up now another, at least a little bit more than a couple of other orders of magnitude. So this is now going up to about a 72 square kilometer scale, or about 7,200 hectare scale. Another 2 orders of magnitude or slightly more from that field. Okay, and this is again what we're interested in, because if we can monitor something here, calibrate and validate a model across this watershed, then we can use the apex model linked with that SWAT model to be able to look at conservation effects across that entire watershed. We'll see how that works. Again, here you're looking at, you have to use land use data. We have to use obviously topography and also the soils information. Make a comment though, soil properties change more sometimes with management, agroforestry buffers, than they do across soil series, which is the traditional approach. Now we'll do this now, about a year ago. Now the SWAT and APEX models now are linked, okay? And Ashish is doing this, and Ranjit mentioned this briefly. So we're using the simulation model for the fields, okay? The APEX is designed more for that particular scale. We can put buffers, et cetera, in here. And now this is also linked to put inputs into the SWAT model, the soil water assessment tool. This is, again, a much larger watershed scale. Hopefully we'll see how this behavior works. So in summary here, briefly, this little section, we obviously are using calibrated, validated simulation models, APEX and SWAT, for evaluating effects of agroforestry conservation buffers. We don't have any data yet on this, but we'll hopefully see this. We've done this on fields, and then we're going to apply and use the APEX model for being able to do this. Again, just a few concepts here, since we don't have a lot of information to share with you. But again, Ranjit did mention we have used the APEX model successfully, at least for runoff for the watersheds out at Hark now. Anyway, thank you very much, and I understand we'll handle questions both for Ranjit's section as well as mine.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
We will take a couple of questions.
And again, you can ask questions to Ranjit, even though he said the hard ones would go to, you'd send to Peter here.
If you don't have any questions right now, we can wait till the end also. We can move on to the next talk and then open up for discussion once we are done with all the, oh, we have it listed. Okay, go ahead.
One question on the modeling. One is the interaction effects when you go at different scales, and then the second one is how do you initialize a model? Do you include in it also climate variability, rainfall patterns to look at projections into the future based on past?
Right. Just briefly here, see, let's take the SWAP model, for example, recent experience for that Goodwater Creek watershed. Typically you have rainfall information. They actually have had a database of rainfall gauges across that watershed, so they actually look at the variability within the watershed slightly. But again, when you're doing calibration and validation, you take about a half of the data set and the other half you use calibration, so you tweak parameters within the ranges that you would expect, okay? So you hopefully match, again, the output measured runoff, you know, say, compared to what you're simulating with the SWAP model. And then you validate that, you don't change any of those parameters, and then you go to the second half of the data set to be able to do that. So you're basically comparing with correct inputs, rainfall measured with obviously measured runoff, all right? Now and what you do is obviously we can speculate on different kinds of buffers being added or conservation measures in there and seeing how much effect. The other big question is with the SEEP project is how many acres of waterways, how many agroforestry buffers, something like this, do you need in order to see a real effect with the weather variability maybe masking some of these effects as they're put in. So that's at least what we're doing at that particular scale. I don't know if that's sort of answering your question. Obviously, all these processes, there's a lot of processes involved in these models. It's a compromise in a time scale when we get to these SWAP models and things to be able to do that, because we're only doing typically on a daily basis. We get down to much smaller, we do at much smaller time scales. Okay? I don't know if that answers the question. But again, hopefully, we'd like to measure this, but it takes a lot of years to be able to look at some of these effects, and so simulation models are at least a nice compromise to help us answer some of these questions as we do that. Thanks. And Ranjit's standing right behind. If you want to ask him any questions,
spooky.
You're welcome to. Yes.
Hey, Steve, this may be a ridiculous question, but one of the things that our center has been trying to do over a span of many years is to determine the specific location for buffers on the landscape. And you're talking about how many of these are required. It seems to me that the more critical question is where do we locate these to maximize the benefits. And from the research that you and Ranjit are doing, where you're scaling up, obviously you're looking at tree buffers on a restricted area, and you're scaling up from that.
Well,
Long term, are you hoping, for example, to have any kind of answer to the question of what areas should be buffered to maximize the benefits?
Absolutely. Obviously, Gene, we haven't yet done this, so we're speculating what we've measured this on, you know, the smaller watersheds where we actually have measurements with the buffers and things, and using the model at that scale. And we're hoping to go to the bigger scale, because that is, in essence, the question, Gene, that a conservation manager wants. I have limited resources. Where should I put the resources in the watershed? And that's, in essence, the objective of the SEEP project. Where should I put those to maximize the environmental benefit? You know, I have limited resources. I mean, obviously, it'd be nice to have buffers everywhere, but we can't afford that. And that's, you know, what NRCS is doing now. They're putting in how much the resources they have, they're putting in these buffers at certain scales. But that, in essence, is the question, and John Sadler could probably answer that much better than I can, but the issue is a cost-benefit. If you have limited resources and how many buffers you can install, or waterways, or whatever conservation measure you're using, and then installing those positionally, where should we concentrate them? You know, should the lower part of the watershed, the upper part? Once we calibrate and validate a model, at least we can begin to answer some of those questions. Again, it's probably strictly on a simulation basis, but it would be nice. There was one paper in Water Resources a year or two ago where they got really fancy. The idea is if you can actually do a lot of simulations and you can optimize. You know, it takes a little bit of computer knowledge to do that, where you can run a lot of simulations, positioning conservation measures across the watershed, and then optimize where should they be placed for the maximum benefit. But it's an automated way of being able to do that. But at least I think it's just right now being scratched at the surface a little of that. But that would be eventually useful for, in an office like a conservation manager would have these dollars, where can I put the buffers to basically maximize my benefits? Okay. Good question.
We have one more question.
And you're welcome to give some to Ranjith here. I know he's wanting to pass all these on to Peter.
I'll leave this out for both of you.
All right, that's fine.
Just kind of focusing on the work that you've done, but it's relevant to a lot of the work that the center has done overall. Have we captured enough of the variability in what could be occurring in the landscape to be able to make this scaling up accurate enough that it's going to actually be extremely useful? So a lot of our work has been done at small scale. We have limited data sets. Have we captured enough of the variability under different types of agroforestry systems, different soil types, that you're going to be able to make this scaling up work extremely well? And I'm kind of using your hydrologic work here as an example, but I think it goes to a lot of the other aspects as well. I just would like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, excellent question, Keith. Do you want to add some comments? Do you want to come up here, Ranjit? I'm lonely up here. Want to come up and join me here?
Models can be, different types of data can be incorporated into the model. For example, Nadi asked about the other predictions, tree growth, different soil types, landscape features, all those can be incorporated. What we need, according to Steve's example, some hydrological properties of the soil profile. So then we should be able to expand these to model. And Steve was planning to explain, when we have the novelty data, we need to the next level data, the USGS gauging station data. So to calibrate and validate our data with the next level data. So it allows us to compare whether buffers are economical and beneficial when you incorporate them in another soil types. Our data was collected now we have about 160 rainfall events. It has been calibrated very well. So for our soil types, we are definite that establishment of buffers about 10% of the land area would help to reduce runoff, sediment, nutrients, pesticide, and improve other soil physical and biological properties. For this soil, clay pan soils, we are confident that it works.